let's go ahead and get started. So yeah, good day, everyone. Thanks so much for joining Nikki, Stephan, and I again for what promises to be a fun exploration through India. We were actually chatting earlier about this, but amazingly, this is the first webinar we featured on India since our webinars began back in 2020. And to me, India is always one of those standout Asian destinations, a must visit, not only for its fabulous birds, but spectacular other wildlife as well. Its history, the countryside, culture, the food is fabulous as well. And you can really quite easily justify 4 separate tours to see the country specials. But yeah, the south is where the majority of the endemics can be found. And they hold a fantastic array of specials as well, which are shared with the island of Sri Lanka to the south. From a personal point of view, I always feel very fortunate as one of my very first duties, as it were, when I joined Rock Jumper back in 2005, was to go and recce southern India. And for some of our audience who have been Rock Jumper fans for years and years, this is going back down the memory lane here, but you might well remember the name David Shackelford. Well, it was a young David and Keith that headed off to the Western Ghats that December, and what an exploration it turned out to be. But that's a whole different story in itself, but needless to say, it was tremendous fun. But yeah, these days the accommodations are really good, the birds are still very much around, and the food is as fabulous as ever. And to take us there today is one of our webinar gurus, Stephan Lorenz. It was his webinar back in June 2020 that actually launched our Dream Destination series. And it is his webinar now that launches our exploration into India. Stephan's one of our most traveled leaders, and he guides groups across the globe for Rock Jumper. He was born in Germany, but moved to the United States at a young age and began his birding in Texas, which, as many of you know, is one of the most biological rich areas of the US. He also completed a Master's of Science degree focusing on grassland birds before joining various research projects in Australia, Jamaica, Costa Rica, and especially Alaska. Stephan also has a broad background in education, including teaching college-level biology and working as a biologist educator for the National Audubon Society. Stephan is also a veteran explorer of the Indian subcontinent, and he knows the region extremely well. As always, we love to field your questions, so please fire those away in the Q&A box or on the chat, and Nikki will have a Q&A session with Stephan at the end. On that note, it's time for our Southern India virtual tour to begin. So take it away, Stephan, and enjoy, everyone.
All right, thank you, Nikki, and thank you, Keith, for the intro. And thanks everybody out there for taking the time to join me and learn about birding in Southern India. It's a location that's I really enjoy leading tours to and visiting. It's fantastic birding there, as Keith mentioned, fantastic food, interesting culture. And I haven't been there in a few years, but I hope to return as soon as possible. And on this intro slide right here, you can already see one of the signature species, the Malabar whistling thrush. Excellent photo by Adam Riley showing this beautiful bird. It's just one of many endemics that can be found on this relatively short tour. So I'll mainly take you through some of the endemics and other specialty species we can see and give you an overview of the itinerary, the route, the landscape, and so on. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, just hold on to the end and I'll be happy to answer those. We all know India is a relatively large country. It's the 8th largest country on the planet. And as Keith mentioned, we do offer a number of tours here. We go to northern India, which is quite popular. Even the Andaman Islands, Western India, and then of course Southern India, which I will talk about today. And the Southern India tour really focuses on the southern end of peninsular India, particularly the Western Ghats mountains. This is a narrow mountain range that roughly parallels the southwest coast of India, and it's considered to be one of the most biodiverse hotspots on the planet. So there are lots of endemic birds there, endemic plants, even mammals, reptiles, and amphibians. So it's an incredible hotspot for biodiversity across fauna and flora. And as you can see here, Southern India is relatively close to Sri Lanka. That was my first webinar. And I do mention some of the species that overlap between the two regions. So this tour actually takes us through 3 different states of India. Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala. So relatively small area of this large country. To take a closer look at the route, we actually start in Bengaluru, or also known as Bangalore. That's the third largest city in India with 8 billion people. Fortunately, we don't spend much time in the city. It's just a starting point. And from there, we head southwest towards Mysore, stopping at a number of sanctuaries along the way. From Mysore, we head south towards Mudumalai National Park, fantastic area of pristine forest. And that's the foothill region of the Western Ghats. And then we'll go into the highlands around Uti. And then we'll cross this Palghat Gap, which I'll mention, well, I'll talk about more of this in just a second here. We'll go to the Parambikulam Tiger Reserve, wonderful area of contiguous primary forest. We'll head back to high elevation around the hill stations of Munnar, beautiful area, easily accessed high elevation montane grassland. And then we'll finish the tour further south at Periyar National Park. That's our last destination before cutting over to the west coast here at Kochi, where the tour ends. So, and Kochi is also a large city, easily connected to other cities internationally or within India for flights. So to talk a little bit more about the Western Ghats. So this is an isolated mountain range in southwestern India. It's narrow and long, following the coastline. It's the western crest of the Deccan Plateau. The plateau is sort of in the middle of southern India here, and these are the high ridges and high points of that plateau. It reaches all the way to 2,637 meters or 8,652 feet at Doda Betta Peak, which is found towards the southern end of the Western Ghats. But interestingly, if you look here below where it says Nilgiris, there's a gap in the mountains called the Palghat Gap. It's about 20 miles wide or 32 kilometers. And that gap, it's a low elevation pass, is enough that it has actually led to speciation of a couple sister species north and south of this gap. So not only do you have birds that are endemic to the Western Ghats, because it is an isolated range, but even within the Western Ghats, you have areas of endemism because you have these breaks in the mountains, which is quite exciting and of course increases the diversity of endemics. Here's an example of this. This is on the left is the Nilgiri Sholakili. So it's a small blue robin of the Muscapidae family. And this is found north of the gap only. And on the right, you have the white-bellied Sholakili distribution, which is found to the south of the gap. And there are some laughing thrushes that have similar distributions. So quite interesting. All you need to do is cross this relatively narrow gap to get into some new endemics. Just to give you a few numbers here, overall in this 12-day tour, we have a chance to see around 35 Indian endemics, pretty high number. And most of these will be restricted to southern India, particularly to the Western Ghats. So this tour really spends most of its time within the foothills and the mountains of the Western Ghats, because that's where most of the endemics are found. In addition to that, you can find around 45 range-restricted species. Most of these will be only found in southern India and Sri Lanka. So those two areas do share some birds. Also, Sri Lanka, of course, has its own set of around 30 endemics. And there are also a few species that are just difficult to find elsewhere, and southern India is a great place to find them. In addition to that, it's great in general for birds of the Indian subcontinent. There are lots of pristine, big natural areas remaining in southern India, which may surprise some of you. There are even big tiger reserves, although Bengal tiger is rarely seen in southern India, but they are present. But it is a great location to see some of the large water birds, raptors, and so on that are quite scarce in other parts of the subcontinent. So once we leave Bangalore, we start heading southwest, and our first stop is usually the Ramadavera Betta Vulture Sanctuary. There's actually an important temple site here, but the vultures nest these steep granitic cliffs, they use them for nesting. And one of the species we're looking for in particular is the Indian vulture. This, we can usually find a couple of birds here, and this is a species that declined precipitously in the last couple of decades. In the 1980s, it was estimated at about 40 million in India. It had almost become a nuisance. It was absolutely abundant, and it has declined to about 5,000 to 15,000 birds today. That's one of the latest estimates. And that decline was a mystery for a while until diclofenac was identified. That is an anti-inflammatory drug that was used in livestock in India, particularly cattle. And when the cattle die, the vultures were feeding on it, and a small dose of that drug unfortunately leads to liver failure in vultures. So the population just declined extremely rapidly. Luckily, there are conservation measures in place now, and the population hopefully is stabilizing and maybe increasing. But we do have a good chance to see this critically endangered vulture here at the sanctuary. We can also see the the Egyptian vulture, which is a more widespread species, but also considered endangered. But there are usually one or two individuals around here. And we may not see this species at the sanctuary, but the white-rumped vulture is possible a bit further south in some of the large forest reserves. And it's also critically endangered. And we'll always keep an eye to the sky for these scarce vultures. You rarely see them in large numbers, but we do have chances to see one or two during the tour. And with great luck, another critically endangered vulture, the red-headed vulture. So this Southern India tour really offers good opportunities to catch up with these rarely seen vultures of the subcontinent. Once we turn our attention to the woodland, we'll see lots of red-whiskered bulbul. To birders in the US, most of you may be familiar with this species. There's the small non-native introduced population in the Miami area, which folks like to track down to add to their ABA list. But in India, this is of course a native species, and it is abundant throughout the tour, but still quite striking. And among these red-whiskered bulbuls, we'll look for a much rarer endemic, the yellow-throated bulbul. This species is restricted to rocky areas with stunted trees and scrub. It's not very common, moves around in pairs through large territories, so it can be a bit tricky to track down. It's only found in central and southern India, but this particular sanctuary right here is a good spot to find it. So this is one of the trickier endemics we'll try to find right away on the first full day. Once we leave the sanctuary, we'll pass through some open agricultural areas, and we'll make stops for a lot of these common roadside birds to get familiar with these, like the scaly-breasted munya, oftentimes found in fields and grassy areas, or the gregarious and social Indian silverbill. This small finch is mainly restricted to the Indian subcontinent, but does occur as feral populations in other parts of the world. But they're really fun to watch as they interact. Indian robins are common in open habitats. In southern India and Sri Lanka, the males are this glossy black coloration overall. In northern India, the males tend to have a brownish back. Green bee-eaters will be just along the roadside, sitting out in the open. This is a relatively widespread bee-eater, but nevertheless, beautiful roadside bird here. And even more striking might be the Indian roller, and they will be sitting on roadside wires, poles, telephone lines, and so on. Just a stunning large roller. And the family rollers, they of course derive their name from their unique courtship flight display, where they tumble and do a pretty unique flight. But a striking species, especially in flight. You have a lot of turquoise and deep blue in the wing and tail. And it's just a pretty incredible roadside bird. Then we'll reach what's called the Ranganathittu Bird Sanctuary. This is a place of about 5 to 6 islands in the Kaveri River. It was actually already set aside in the 1940s. It was identified by the father of Indian ornithology, Salim Ali, who recognized this area as a pretty important rookery and breeding site for water birds. And the King of Mysore in 1940 set it aside as a sanctuary, and it functions as an excellent sanctuary today. And it's just full of bird life. And during our visit, we'll actually take a small rowboat out into the river to get close to the rookeries and river edge. In the scrub and trees around here, we can see the endemic spot-breasted fantail. This endemic actually hybridizes with the white-throated fantail in the northern part of its range, but here where we are, we'll see pure spot-breasted fantails. We'll definitely hear and we'll carefully look for the white-cheeked barbet, another India endemic, very common, and it can be heard at all hours of the day. So I got that typical barbet call that most of you will be familiar with, and prefers to feed in large fruiting trees. And we should see our first ones either in Mysore or definitely here at the sanctuary. The Indian grey hornbill is not endemic to India, but almost so. We got good chances to see it here. They move around in small groups, oftentimes from fruiting tree to fruiting tree. And they have this distinctive hornbill-like flight where they flap and glide, and also have this primate-like laughing call that's quite distinctive too. But we should see our first ones in this area. And we'll take good note of them because there's a similar species further south that's endemic to the Western Ghats. Of course, there'll be plenty of water birds around here as we take the boat out on the river, like the Indian pond heron. This is a non-breeding plumage. In flight, they're really striking. Their entire wings and tail are pure white. We'll see purple herons. This one is usually a bit more secretive than the common gray heron, sticks to denser vegetation, but they're easily seen in the wetlands here or nearby. And the red-naped ibis, that's another near-endemic. We may not see it at the sanctuary itself, but it does prefer drier upland areas nearby. And on the crown and nape, you can see these distinctive red warts, pretty striking ibis. And of course, oriental darters are fairly common here. These are in the same family as the familiar anhinga. They'll do a similar behavior where the body is submerged underwater and just the head and the neck sticking out. And they use that dagger-like bill to fish. And they're part of the Anhingidae family, which actually has only 4 members found on, although found on nearly every continent. But oriental darters are quite common here and also easily photographed from the boat because the birds tend to be not that shy. Indian cormorant with its distinctive blue-green eyes and rounded head is a highlight here. We also see a number of storks relatively easily, like the woolly-necked stork. It's fairly common. In Asian open bill, it's easily seen, sometimes in large numbers here. You can see the namesake bill right there. It's got this gap in the bill, very similar to the African open bill in terms of bill shape, but the coloration is, of course, completely different. African open bills being dark. And the beautiful painted stork, quite a stunning stork, and they roost and nest here at the sanctuary. So we can oftentimes get fairly close and have great photo opportunities. And in general, birds in India are not that shy because they're not persecuted, so photo opportunities are fantastic. We'll carefully scan the banks of the Kaveri River for the great thickney. So this guy right here is taking a rest in the shade, and you can see it's actually not, it's technically sitting on its ankles and not its thick knees, which are hidden by plumage right here. But this sanctuary is a great place to catch up with this distinctive shorebird. And the spot-billed pelican. The namesake spots on the upper mandible are a little tricky to see in this photo. This is a species that's found in Southeast Asia and throughout the Indian subcontinent, but it's pretty scarce throughout its range, but quite numerous here in southern India, particularly at the sanctuary. So it's a great bird to catch up with, and we get great studies of dozens of them as we visit their rookeries. And the river tern is also possible here. This one prefers unpolluted fresh water, which the sanctuary luckily provides. After this, we move on to Mysore. This is sometimes known as the city of palaces. Quite a few old palaces can be found, and we'll spend some time visiting Mysore Palace. This was finished in 1912. It was the seat of the king of Mysore. And interestingly, it is the second most visited tourist site in India. The first one being the Taj Mahal, of course, but it's quite popular with local tourists, and it's a stunning architecture. So if we have time, we visit usually the outside of it, visit the park, do a little bit of birding here before heading on further south. Along the way, we'll pass through some open areas, open woodland and agricultural areas. We'll make some incidental stops, hopefully for large gray babblers. This is actually quite scarce on this particular itinerary. And this genus of babbler is typically very noisy and conspicuous and easy to see. So we'll keep an eye out for these guys along the roadside. They're quite similar to other babblers in this genus, but they have these distinctive dark lores, and we'll see others later on in the trip. And then we reach Mudumalai National Park. This is in the foothills of the Western Ghats, particularly the Nilgiri Mountains at around 850 to 1250 meters, or 3,000 to 4,000 feet roughly. And it protects extensive stands of subtropical and tropical broadleaf forest interspersed with grassland. It really packs a lot of habitat variety into a small area, even some small agricultural plots. Here you can see our group birding at sunset near the lodge, some grassland area on the edge of the forest. It's really productive and a lot of fun birding there. The lodge itself is set right into a patch of open woodland, right into the national park. And it's fantastic. Even the lodge grounds will have tons of birds. Near to the cabins and the restaurant area is a small ravine with a small stream and a shaded bamboo patch that attracts some of these secretive species like forest wagtail. And if we wait there patiently, Indian blue robins may come out and show themselves really well as they're foraging. Really beautiful, small robin, but striking species. Also, the orange-headed thrush can be found here. In southern India, it's the white-throated race or white-throated form with this distinctive face pattern of those two dark lines. Also, all we have to do is stand back and wait quietly and patiently, and these birds will show themselves really well. Also, the Indian pitta. This migrates to southern India during this time of year, during November and February. And it's really one of the easier pittas to see in the world, but we'll take a careful look here and we should be able to find one or two. One of the local names is Narang for this species, which means 9 colors, which is very appropriate. You can't see it in this photo, but it does have a turquoise blue rump and wing patch, and it's just an absolute beautiful bird. Much more difficult to see is the endemic Nilgiri thrush. This is part of the scaly thrush complex. And they prefer these very shaded areas where there's moist soil that they can forage in. You can see some soil on the bill of this bird. It's fairly large zoothora thrush, but like most zoothora thrushes, it's secretive and shy. I would say this is one of the trickier Western Ghats endemics. We need some luck and patience to see it. But Mudumalai in past years was a good location to find it. We'll move into more open woodland to continue our birding, where we can find the widespread but really uncommon white-naped woodpecker. Last time I was there, we searched for this species for quite a while, couldn't find it, only to discover one right next to the cabins as we went back for lunch. So it just shows you that the lodge there is just fantastic for birding itself. We'll also hear and track down small family groups of the Indian scimitar-bill babbler, very distinctive with this banana-colored bill. You can oftentimes hear them foraging noisily as they tear into bark and the leaf litter, and they're constantly calling to each other. Can be a bit skulky, but with patience, they'll come out into the open for great views. We'll also see some migrants this time of year. There are a number of warblers that spend the winter here. I'm not going to go into those too much, but we can see good numbers of Eurasian hoopoes that come here from the north. You can see that long bill. They'll be on the ground foraging, probing into the ground with that long thin bill. And then when disturbed, hopefully flush up to a low open perch like this one did for great views and photos. Once we turn away from the open woodland, we can bird some of these grassland patches that are home to Jerdon's bushlark. This is a species that's restricted to southern India and Sri Lanka. And even better, we'll focus on some grassland areas that are interspersed with rocky patches or rocks, as you can see in this photo. And that's the home of the Malabar lark. So this is endemic to the Western Ghats in the foothills or low elevations. Got this distinctive crest and short tail. And Mudumalai is a fantastic place to find this bird. there's usually a reliable spot for it. We can also find the yellow-wattled lapwing here, another species that's endemic to the Indian subcontinent. It's actually quite small for a lapwing and not as noisy as some of the other lapwing species. And Mudumalai is our best chance to find it. Prefers drier upland areas and usually agricultural patches or grassland, and we can oftentimes find one or two in this area. The other habitat type that's here is this open acacia woodland that we'll go into with a local guide. We can actually walk here, hopefully see the bayback shrike, really beautiful striking shrike, and the small minivet. As the name suggests, this really is the smallest minivet, and they move around in flocks, small groups, constantly calling to each other, and they behave very similar to flycatchers, selling out and catching insects. But even more exciting is the white-bellied minivet. This is a very scarce Indian endemic found in central and southern India, prefers this specific open acacia woodland. And it's not easy to find. They seem to roam around very large areas and small monospecific flocks. In addition, the area where the local guides usually know that the birds are present, it's part of the national park, and we're not allowed to exit the vehicles because there are large mammals present, Asian elephants, and even tigers and leopards. So what we oftentimes have to do is carefully look for this bird from the vehicles, which is not always easy because they move rather rapidly, but we usually have some luck getting views of this really scarce Indian endemic. Can't see it, unfortunately, in this photo, but it's got this reddish rufous rump and also an orange colored chest. This is a male right here. And as we move around the woodland, we should come across spotted owlets. This is a species that's widespread and common in India. And oftentimes they'll sit out during the day in front of their roosting or nesting cavity, like this pair is doing, soaking up the early morning sunshine to warm up. Mudumalai is fantastic for night birds in general. The guides oftentimes know a spot for roosting savanna nightjar that we can find. And then we can stay out after dark, look for Indian nightjar. This has a distinctive ping pong ball-like call, and also this whitish mustache streak, which is distinct. And oftentimes in the same area even, we can find the jungle nightjar nearby, not restricted to jungles at all, but open grassy areas. And with luck, back at the lodge or in some more wooded habitats or wetland habitats, we can find the Jordan's nightjar, which is restricted to southern India and Sri Lanka. So in one evening, it's possible to see 4 species of nightjars in this area, which is quite impressive. There are plenty of mammals around. One of the more interesting ones is the dhole, also known as the Indian or Asiatic wild dog. It's about the size of a hefty coyote, I would say, but they are diurnal pack hunters. So they can take down fairly large prey, including spotted deer, and I think they've even been known to hunt sambar deer, which are quite a bit larger. And this particular individual, we were standing in a grassland looking and listening for birds, and we had been standing still for quite some time, and this dhole just trotted up to us, noticed us at the last minute, and just stood there in surprise, and we got great views and photos of it. So Mudumalai seems to be a fairly reliable place to see dhole in southern India. I've also seen sloth bears in this area and some other exciting mammals. Once we leave Mudumalai, we enter the Western Ghats proper, the Nilgiris, go up in elevation. This photo shows you a little bit of the topography and habitat here. We'll go up to Uti, which is above 2,000 meters, above 7,000 feet. The climate is cooler and wetter here, and tea estates really take over. This is the main agricultural product here in the Western Ghats at high elevations. You can see the tea plantation in the middle of the photo there. Give you another image, another overview of the mountains. One distinctive habitat feature here are called sholas. These are islands of montane forest. They're set amidst these montane grasslands. You can see one in the middle of the picture here. And these sholas, these woodland patches, are really the best locations to look for many of the highland endemics of the Western Ghats and the Nilgiris in particular. Here's just another photo of what one of the tea plantation looks like. It's a very monotypic habitat, and as you can imagine, it's not the most productive for birds. But even here you can find endemics and rufous babblers. It's another one of these large babblers that occurs in family groups. They do occur in these tea estates. It's quite secretive compared to some of its congeners. So this photo is a really nice photo here, I believe taken by David Hodnott. If I got that wrong, I apologize to the photographer. But they don't always show this well. But we can find them in these tea estates too, and woodland. Once we enter the sholas or the forest patches, we'll start seeing some woodland birds like the greater flameback, fairly widespread species that can be found here. And in terms of endemics, we'll look for the Nilgiri flycatcher. This species is restricted to elevations above 1,200 meters. Quite distinctive, it's the only all-blue flycatcher in this area, in this habitat, often fairly approachable and readily found. And more striking even is the black and orange flycatcher, restricted to elevations above 1,000 meters, also found in these sholas. And they'll oftentimes stick to the denser part of trees and scrubs. And we'll need a little bit of patience to get a good clear view of it, but it's definitely worth it. Very distinctive Western Ghats endemic. More secretive is the Nilgiri sholakili. This used to be called Nilgiri blue robin. I do like this new common name a lot more, sholakili. It is part of the Muscapidae family, so it's related to stone chats and old world flycatchers, but it's fairly distinctive with a really cool song. And secretive, prefers these wet areas with dense tangles low to the ground. And as you can see from this poor photo I got, it's not always easy to see, but we usually manage good looks, but rarely good photos because they do prefer these dark, shady patches. In the same area, we'll look for the Nilgiri laughing thrush. It's the only montane laughing thrush found here. Also a bit skulky, fairly small for a laughing thrush, but luckily they're quite vocal, which helps us track down these small flocks and family groups of them. This used to be called the black-chinned laughing thrush, but it was split a few years ago into the Nilgiri laughing thrush and the Banasura laughing thrush. And the Banasura laughing thrush is restricted to mountains to the west of our route. From here, we'll actually go into the Palghat Gap. So we'll go down in elevation again towards the Parambikulam Tiger Reserve. Another fantastic area of contiguous, pristine lowland and foothill forest. A really nice mixture of habitat. Huge patch of pristine habitat that still supports Bengal tigers, leopards, and a number of other large mammals. And the most exciting aspect about this location is we'll actually go right to the center of the reserve. We stay in a forest camp here. You can see the cabins in the background, 2 members of our groups, digiscoping birds right in the middle of camp. And it's just fantastic to be surrounded by pristine forest, lots of endemics, lots of exciting birds passing through, endemic primates, everything is present here. It also makes it easy for night birding. After dinner, you can just step outside the restaurant or step outside your cabin. They're usually brown boobuks hunting in camp. And oriental scops owls are quite common, especially by voice. Not always easy to spot, small owl in the canopy, but we can usually find one. And if we're lucky, during the night or even during the day, we might spot a brown fish owl on a day roost, which are also present here in good numbers. And right in the middle of camp, you oftentimes have Indian peafowl wandering through. And if we're lucky, we have some of these males displaying just a stunning display of colors and feathers of the bird world. And these are, of course, native and wild populations here. You hear them frequently, and they're quite approachable and tame in this national park. And the endemic gray jungle fowl is present in good numbers too. Frequently heard, and we usually find them early morning, late afternoon along the edge of the roads here, or even crossing the road. And as you can see, it's pretty distinctive from the more widespread red jungle fowl of northern India and Southeast Asia, another endemic of southern India. And the bird of the first slide, the Malabar whistling thrush, a really impressive whistling thrush, quite large, colorful, not as secretive as some other whistling thrush species. These will occur right around human habitation. This one was right in the middle of camp. moving back and forth between buildings and some wet areas to feed. They have this really odd human-like whistle, which is part of the dawn chorus here at the Parambikulam Park. And I mentioned we do get some nice mammals too. For example, Asian elephant is fairly common here, even at Mudumalai. Indian giant squirrel can be seen, a large, colorful squirrel. The spotted deer, this is of course the favorite prey of Bengal tigers. The endemic Nilgiri langur can be found readily in these forests throughout the tour. And with great luck, we may even see leopard, which are present here. And I have seen this with groups before at Parambikulam. Here's another photo showing some of the landscape. The gaur occurs in good numbers here, also known as the Indian bison. This is the largest extant bovid on the planet. Males can be up to 1,500 kilograms. So that's more than 3,000 pounds. They look pretty small in this photo, but they are impressive animals. Once we enter the forest, we'll start seeing some forest birds. We can actually walk on some trails here with local guides. The common hawk cuckoo is frequently heard, and we should see some. Also the beautiful Asian emerald dove, sometimes flushes of the trail and perches in the low canopy. Jungle babblers are noisy and conspicuous. They move around in flocks, foraging on the ground, fairly easy to see. Less easy to see is the blue-faced malkoa. This large cuckoo really prefers dense tangles, and we'll need some patience and luck to get a good view of this one. And even more luck is required for the endemic gray-headed bulbul. Fairly inconspicuous bulbul, sticks to shaded tangles, not as noisy as other bulbul species, but Parambikulam is the best place to catch up with it. From Parambikulam, we'll drive through the Chenner Wildlife Sanctuary. Again, we can't really stop here and exit the vehicle, so we usually roll along slowly, birding incidentally. It's a good place to look for the white-browed bulbul, only found in southern India and Sri Lanka. And with great luck, we may get a barred button quail on the edge of the road or even in the middle of the road. Looks like a small quail or partridge, but they're actually distantly related. Then we'll head back to higher elevation at the Munnar Hill Station. This was a hill station that the British established during the summers to get to higher elevation and milder temperatures. Beautiful climate here, still lots of resorts and hotels present. Similar habitat as Uti. You can see some of the sholas and montane grasslands here. Here we climbed up to a ridge into the grassland to look for the broad-tailed grassbird. I would argue that's the trickiest of all the Western Ghats endemics during this tour. Well, we'll try our best, looking for it in this shoulder-high grass. We'll also visit Eravikulam National Park. You can see some of the dramatic topography here, some of the beautiful waterfalls coming down. This is up at the higher elevations of Eravikulam. Again, the grassland in front of us here in this photo is home of the grassbird and also the scarce Nilgiri pipit. The Eravikulam National Park was mainly established to protect the Nilgiri tahr. It's an endemic ungulate to southern India. And in the forests here, once we get into shady areas, we can find widespread species like gray-headed canary flycatcher, the endemic Indian yellow tit. It's most common in these foothill areas, oftentimes joining mixed species flocks. Also the Indian blackbird, another species restricted to southern India and Sri Lanka, often found in shady ravines, and those ravines unfortunately also accumulate some garbage, as you can see in the background. Those are usually the best places to find that blackbird. Hill swallow is found above 500 meters, also only found in southern India and Sri Lanka. And the Palani laughing thrush. It's quite confiding here at Eravikulam National Park, restricted to the southern Western Ghats mountains south of the Palghat Gap. And this was also split. This used to be called Kerala laughing thrush and was split into Palani and Ashambu laughing thrushes. And a Shambhu laughing thrush occurs further south from our route. We can find the second Sholakili species here, the white-bellied Sholakili. And with patience and luck, we may get fantastic views like this. Oftentimes, it's good to find an open area in the forest where birds are feeding and wait patiently, and birds may come out and reveal themselves, like the stunning painted bush quail. Fairly secretive, but with patience, they'll sometimes wander out into the open, like this adult did right here with its chick. Also crimson-backed sunbird, another Western Ghats endemic, found in the foothills here, striking species. And the scarce Nilgiri wood pigeon, another challenging endemic to find, but we got some good spots for it. Fairly quiet for its size, and it's a large pigeon, but we'll scan carefully through the canopy to find one. And the Nilgiri pipit I mentioned briefly can be found in these grassland areas. Also quite scarce, but we usually have some luck finding one or two. Our last stop of the tour, we'll move south, will be Periyar National Park. This is at lower elevation. It's a wetter climate, so you get this beautiful broad-leafed, very wet forest, tall canopy. You get things like great hornbill here, and it's starting to feel like a true Asian rainforest, actually. And we'll see a lot of species here we don't see elsewhere on the tour. Here, our group is getting onto this bamboo raft to get across the river and start some of the trails on the other side. Quite an exciting venture. Here you can see one of the trails winding through the forest. You can see it's already a lot wetter, the canopy is taller. It's very similar to birding in any of these Asian rainforests. If we haven't seen it at this point, we can catch up with the Nilgiri flower pecker, another endemic, fairly drab small bird, but fairly distinctive from the other flower peckers in its range. And one of the most stunning Western Ghats endemics, I think, is the white-bellied tree pie. They oftentimes move around in mixed feeding flocks with other larger birds like greater racket-tailed drongos and Malabar starlings, but a really striking endemic, and Periyar is a great place to see it. Also, we can catch up with the Malabar gray hornbill. This is a female with a slightly darker bill, similar to the Indian gray hornbill, but doesn't have a casque and different head coloration. And in these wetter forests, we can find yellow-browed bulbul to add yet another bulbul to the list. This one is also restricted to southern India and Sri Lanka. So it's a range-restricted near-endemic. If we carefully look in some shaded areas and gullies, we can find the endemic white-bellied blue flycatcher. Has a habit of flicking its wings and fanning its tail while foraging. Periyar is a great place to find it. And we'll finish with some of the most colorful and interesting species here for the tour. The beautiful Malabar trogon. Like most trogons, it's a striking bird. Likes shaded bamboo areas, sitting still for long periods before flying out to feed. This is another species that's restricted to southern India and Sri Lanka. And we'll finish the day, the last day, with some night birds. If we're lucky, we may find Indian scops owl on a day roost on the right there, which can be found here to add yet another owl to the trip list. And we'll definitely make a good effort for the Sri Lanka frogmouth, as the name suggests, also restricted to southern India and Sri Lanka. And you can see on the left is actually the male, more grayish brown coloration, whereas the female has overall more rufous tones to the plumage. Unfortunately, local guides oftentimes know of a day roost where we can find a pair. So that was my overview for southern India. I hope it gave you a taste for the region, for the birds, for the endemics, and the route in general. And I appreciate your time. Thank you for watching. And I want to say thanks to David Hottenot and Glenn Valentine and Keith for sharing some of the excellent photos that I was able to use in this presentation. And I would love to answer some questions and let me know what you have.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Stephan. Yeah, certainly have a drink of water there. It's well earned.
Thank you.
That was very special. It's been a few years since I actually visited Indian subcontinent on a whole, and South India as well. And that certainly brought back some very, very fun memories of some of those places. I remember wandering some of those sholas and thinking, wow, when am I going to bump into an Asian elephant? Because it's so wild and it's so exotic. It's so yeah, it's so special, and it feels so untouched as well. I guess so many parts of that part of India. Yeah, Western Ghats are very, very special indeed. So as Stephan said, send through your questions if you've got some questions, and Nikki will pick those up with Stephan shortly. I know there's a few that have come through. So on that note, over to you, Nikki.
Thank you so much, Stephan. Absolutely awesome presentation. Thank you so much. I can't wait to travel there myself one day. Tell me, what sort of clothes would I need to pack for a trip on this trip? How warm or how cold are we looking?
Yeah, that's a good question. We run the tour usually between November and February. So that's the winter months there, because that is the cooler time of the year. So in the lowlands, it can be quite warm. So you want to have light clothes, light shirts. We're talking maybe high 80s on a real sunny day. So that's about high 20s or low 30s in degrees Celsius. So you definitely want to pack for warm and tropical for the lowlands. But once we get to higher elevations, at Dodda Betta Peak, we're at about 8,000 feet. It can be quite cool in the morning, so definitely you want to bring some layers, a fleece, and a windbreaker. We do go during the dry season. We don't expect a lot of precipitation, but it might be good to have a rain jacket and a windbreaker with you anyway. But no gloves or scarves are needed. So I would say the temperatures are warm to mild overall.
Lovely. Kathy's asking, how common are venomous snakes?
That's a really good question. Trying to recall, I've never seen one in that area myself. They're certainly present if you would wander way off trail, but you never see them. They're very scarce and shy, and we usually don't encounter those.
Yeah, I'm with Stephan on that one. Sorry, just to step in there quickly.
No, please do.
I've never seen one in all my travels in southern India. I remember seeing a beautiful pit viper once in Sri Lanka, but not in South India.
Yeah. I'm not recalling off the top of my head ever seeing a venomous snake in India at all. I mean, yeah, they're not common.
Polly is asking, do we travel in open air jeeps?
Yeah, so we do some switches of vehicles. It depends on the reserve. In Mudumalai, for example, at that time we were using small open jeeps to move around a bit, particularly for some of the evening drives or night drives. And in Parambikulam, we actually use, if we go further out, we use a bus, a fairly large bus. So it does vary quite a bit, but in between locations, we have a comfortable minibus or van. So that gets us from park to park, and within the park itself, it might change occasionally. We do quite a bit on foot also with local guides from the various reserves.
Talking about being on foot, what about leeches?
They're not as prevalent as other parts of India. Maybe in the southern part of it, in Periyar National Park, where you get into some of the wetter forests. But again, it's not the rainy season, so they're not prevalent at all. I never used leech socks, and I don't recall ever having any on the ground or nearby. There might be one or a few spots, a few of the wetter forest patches where it might be a good idea to put on leech socks just to be safe, but they're not prevalent.
Oh, great. And Linda, I hear you on this one because I'm swatting away mosquitoes that are near me. How buggy and is malaria a concern? So what's the bugs like, and is malaria a concern?
So malaria is not a concern. It's not endemic to that part of the world, that part of India. And bugs are really almost nothing. Again, it's the dry season. We do spend a lot of time birding this savanna-like grasslands, open forests, which are dry, really comfortable to bird in. And then at higher elevation, these forests don't tend to have a lot of biting insects. It's generally a really comfortable tour in terms of climate, in any sort of insect pests. It's also The walking in general is easy. Trails are well established, not a lot of up and down. So like I mentioned, the birds are confiding because they tend to be in India because they're not persecuted. These areas are really well protected. So it's a really fun tour in general with easy birding on a few difficult species.
Kathy's come back and said, what are leech socks?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. They're these sort of, it's kind of like a thin canvas, I guess, that goes over your regular sock, goes into your boot and ties off roughly just below your knee. And because they're made of very dense material, if a leech happens to get on there, it can't get through that material. So they might kind of clamber up on it, but they won't be able to get to your ankles or into your shoes as easily. So they are quite effective. And we rock trumpeters provide leech socks if you choose that gift option. And they're pretty stylish too.
Absolutely. Both Ilse and Karen are asking the same question, and I think we did chat about it, but let's go over it again. What time of the year is the best time? So what month is the best for this trip, and when does it go next?
I believe right now we're running tours in November and then into February too. Those are the two times. Those are the cooler months of the year. It's also the dry season, and it's also the time of year when migrants are present. So northern bird species that winter in southern India. So it's a good, I didn't have a chance to go into it too much in the presentation, but there is a good diversity of warblers, a couple really sought after species like Tittler's leaf warbler and so on that are present during that time. So it really adds to the, not only is it more pleasant to bird that time of year, but it also adds to the diversity overall.
Absolutely. How likely are we to see dholes?
You need a good amount of luck. I mean, we're present within their range where they occur for a few days, so you do need a decent amount of luck. But they do seem to, at Mudumalai, they do seem to be present sort of along this regular route. Maybe it's one particular pack or not, but it passes right by the lodge. The lodge at Mudumalai is absolutely fantastic. I mean, one of the best places in the world. You're really in the heart of the habitat there, even to the point where they, you can have mammals wandering right through camp, including Asiatic wild dogs or dholes.
Yeah. Just a second, Stephan, there quickly. Sorry, jumping in again, but it brings back memories. Yeah, no, I mean, I remember a couple of times, seeing dhole on foot, including one large pack that I had there with my brother one year, where we actually just watched them sort of down a hill. Quite incredible. So it's not, as Stephan's saying, it's not an unusual sighting. I mean, you need a fair bit of luck always, but they're certainly around. And you put yourself there, you've definitely got a chance. And as Stephan said, I mean, it's a good area. She's sloth bear as well. Seen there a few times too.
And I would say, Keith, southern India is probably the best place in the world to see dhole.
Yeah.
It's widespread, I mean, found in Southeast Asia, but it's probably one of the better places to see it.
Yeah, unless you sort of, some of the central tiger reserves like Kana and what have you as well can be quite good. But you're right. South India gives you a pretty decent chance.
I have to laugh at Paul. He says, not sure any leech socks can ever be described as stylish. I put the ever in there. Hi, Paul. I had a good laugh there. Kathy is saying, any chance of a tiger sighting?
So they are present in these tiger reserves, of course. Seem to be present in lower numbers. They're not as readily seen as in northern India. They seem to be more active at night. I do remember being there once and missing one by about a minute. It was wandering through an open area. So there are chances there for sure, but I would say not the best place in the world to look for tigers, but they're definitely present.
And number of expected species?
Yeah, that can vary a bit depending on some of the reservoirs and some flooded fields, which can add a lot of shorebirds. But I would say between 265, 275, so around 270 species are possible.
Oh, great. Thank you, Brian. He's saying for someone who's birded only in the Americas, a number of likely new birds. I think we've also answered that. So
only
how many
birded
new
in,
birds?
okay, only birded in the New World in the Americas, I assuming. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think all of them. I mean, there's very limited overlap. I mean, maybe an osprey I can think of as an overlap species, peregrine falcon, but maybe, yeah, not even shorebirds. So I think, 260, 270 new species. I think nearly everything on the list would be new.
Oh, great. Corin's saying, I must have missed the name of the very last owl.
Okay, yeah, no, which one? The one that's on the image right now, I guess? Or, and I never mentioned the name of these guys. I assume this one is it. These are jungle owlets.
Oh.
That is a pair of jungle owlets, which are also present in southern India, found in Sri Lanka too, in India. But another one of these diurnal owlets that's quite readily seen on this tour. What
guidebook do you recommend for this trip?
Well, that's a good question. I think that has been updated. There's a really good India field guide. I don't have the image right now off the top of my head. And the other one I recommend to everybody right now is, if you can download the Merlin app on your phone, which is free through the Cornell lab, and they will have a packet probably either for India or even for South India specifically. So I can always recommend the Merlin app. And then Keith, I'm just gonna throw the ball in your court there. Are you aware of any updated guide right now?
No, not updated. Let's do a little check here.
I think it's the classic birds of the Indian subcontinent that will still be very.
Yeah,
very
I think of my ones that I've got on the shelf here. It's the sort of birds of Indian subcontinent, and then the Rasmussen one that came out as well.
Okay.
So now a bunch of years ago. I mean, that was sort of state of the art at the time when I did a lot of trips out there, because they'd done a lot of the splitting and what have you then, and we were all eyes open. Wow, look at all these new birds and potential splits. But we're now talking 17 years later, and yeah, all that's kind of old knowledge now. It's all the splits have been accepted, and
that's a nice aspect about the Merlin app that I recommended, because it continually updates, so it will have these latest splits like the laughing thrushes and so on in it. So that's quite helpful, in addition to having one of the older field guides.
Absolutely. Richard saying, how far do you typically hike at the upper elevations for each day?
So the higher elevations that we bird at, those are all accessible by vehicle. For example, we'll reach above 8,000 feet at Dora Beta Peak, but that's drivable. You drive right to the top parking lot, and you only have to walk, we're talking 100 meters, 300 feet to get to a little patch of forest where most of the birds occur. So we don't do any extensive hiking at higher elevations, just walking on easy trails or roads. And then some of the other reserves, when we go out with a local guide, we're talking maybe half a morning of hiking, 2 to 3 kilometers, 1.5 to 2 miles on relatively easy terrain too. So physically, it's not that difficult of a trip. We don't do many climbs on foot.
Yeah. Do we travel by train between cities?
No. I'm not aware of any major train connections there. It's all by minibus or van.
Sherry's saying, I remember the yellow painted cows at the palace. Is that just an annual religious event?
I assume it is, because I've never seen it. So I assume that must be a seasonal thing or at a specific date or something. I have not seen it. I don't know whether Keith remembers any events there, but I have not.
And the very last question is from Polly, and what a lovely one to end off. Sure, the food is fabulous, but can you describe some of the must-try food?
Ooh, it's been a while. It's all I can say is it's quite different than what we sometimes consider as the standard Indian food, because that oftentimes comes from northern India. So it's not as it can be spicy. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. And right now I'm actually lost. It's been a while. All I can remember is it's absolutely delicious and varied, with lots of options for vegetarians and meat too, fish and chicken and so on. So biryani comes to mind, which is a rice dish. So it's quite varied. I don't know whether Keith remembers anything that really stood out to him.
Now, for me, I mean, for those that don't know me well, but I love cooking, and Indian cuisine is some of my favorite to cook at home. But I've taken a lot of inspiration from South Indian, dishes and food. But I think, as Stephan says, on the whole, it can generally be a little more spicier than the North Indian type cuisine. It doesn't have to be, but it generally can be. But loads of vegetarian options, like incredible variety of vegetables that they use. And generally less, I would say, sort of less rich in a way than some of the Northern Indian type dishes. Incredibly tasty, use of spices and balance of flavor, but generally not as rich. And then, I mean, I just sort of remember most of the time going up and getting yourself a beautiful, whatever it might be, a chapati or something like that. And you're just throwing different curries on there and just having a ball with that. And there's just so much to try. I think that's the beauty. Whenever you're at these places, we're always ordering a variety of different dishes. And so you can always, pick and choose and try your favorites and then just get stuck in. It's good fun from a food point of view.
That has made me feel very hungry now. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us, everyone. It's always lovely the time we get to spend with you. Thank you, Stephan, for your notes and chatting to us today. What a great adventure. And watch out for the next webinar. We should be mailing in a week or two's time. We're doing these things now once a month. And Keith, I don't know if you want to end off with some final notes on your side.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Thanks so much again, Stephan. Thank you, Nikki, as well. As Nikki hinted at, we're doing these once a month now, and the next one is actually going to be Malaysian Borneo. So for those of you who are on now, you get a little sneak peek into that. So Nigel's going to be presenting on Malaysia and Borneo, another two of my favorite parts of the world. Just incredible, the rainforests out there, and such a huge diversity of birds, and a lot of specials as well. That's one not to be missed. And I forget the date off the top of my head. I think it's around the 13th of April or so. But as Nikki says, we'll be sending out those notifications in early April. And yeah, thank you, Stephan, again for kicking off India. I think it's a great base to start from, and we'll start exploring further north from here. There's some fabulous parts to still discuss and get stuck into. India's really one of our all-time favorite destinations to go and explore. Lots to see, and yeah, lots on the birding front, lots on the mammal front as well. So it should be good fun. And yeah, on that note, goodbye everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you. Cheers.
Take care.
Bye.